So you've gotten your concealed carry permit in your state of residence. You're now free to carry your firearm concealed pretty much anywhere besides a few locations. But now you need to leave your state. Is it legal to travel to the state next door? To discuss this issue and what reciprocity is, we're talking with pro Second Amendment attorney Seth Morris. Welcome to the show, Seth.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Let's start off with the basics. Before traveling to another state with your concealed firearm, what should you do?
All right, so there are two things that I highly recommend. So the first is, so USCCA has a really good reciprocity map. So check and make sure that the state that you are traveling to or the states that you're traveling through, right, that you have reciprocity on all of those. And they do a great job of making sure to keep that up to date. So the first thing is to make sure that every state you are going to or through it has reciprocity with your issuing state. The second is you want to check magazine laws in each state, right? Because that's a really easy way to, even if you can carry, to go afoul and find yourself getting cited. And depending on the state, the magazines are a bigger punishment than not having a concealed carry permit, right? So, for instance, in Colorado, you can't have 15 rounds as their max, right? So I just upgraded to a VP9 Optics Ready, which has 17 round mags. The VP9 has 15 round mags. So I was good with the VP9, but with the new one, now I could be looking at criminal charges in Colorado if I carry the 17 round mags. So those are the first two things you want to check. Make sure that you can carry there, and then make sure that the magazine restrictions, you're not going to run awry of that.
Yeah, the last time I went to Colorado, I called ahead of time. I talked to the sheriff of the county that I was going to be visiting in, and they said, yeah, it's illegal to have more than your 15-round magazine. But if you bought your 30-round magazine before this law went into place, you're okay. I'm like, well, how are you going to prove that? I don't know. So.
Yeah, I think I've heard, I cannot confirm, that depending on where you are in Colorado, they really don't care. The more rural areas, I'm sure in Denver, they do care. But you think it wouldn't be that difficult? There has to be a serial number, right? They could probably subpoena the production records from Magpul if they wanted to get you for that. There'd have to be some way to determine when it was made.
Probably would have been easier when Magpul was still in Colorado.
Yeah, then that would just knock on the door and show up.
So just, I guess, back during the Clinton era and the Clinton administration, when we had the assault rifle bans and stuff like that, if you had a pre-ban assault rifle, you could have you could have it decked out with whatever you needed on there. Now, I guess, do you know, is there technically like a pre-ban, is there any way other than subpoenaing on an actual traffic stop to know if something's pre-banned or not?
I guess it would probably just depend on the knowledge of the officer, right? So I think we'll use my VP9. I want to say that's been around since early 2010s, right? So if the officer knows that the Optics Ready hasn't come out till 2020, then I couldn't have had the 17 round mags prior to 2020, right? So unless I guess it would probably depend on the knowledge of the officer or what they can just Google, right? Because right now they all have, in their mobile data terminals, they have internet access. So they would be able to see when this particular magazine or this particular firearm was released.
Right. So I mean, it would all come down to the knowledge of the corresponding officer with how it is. So, I get it. I mean, it's the same, really the same thing we have to deal with in places like Nebraska, where I was a police officer at, is with the short rifles and the small shock waves and things like that. I know a lot of people that didn't have knowledge in that, would write it for different things. So
yeah, and then at that point your all other weapon is getting seized, and now you're having to fight to get it back.
Why do some states consider your state's permit valid and some don't?
So it seems to me to be an issue of politics. Generally, the deeper blue the state, the less they reciprocate. So California, for instance, doesn't have reciprocity with a single other state, right? Other states like Washington, Oregon, New York, very limited or none at all. New Jersey, for instance. The blue states seem to be the worst for reciprocity. Sometimes they may look at, for instance, what training is required, right? That could be something that the states look into, because I can't figure out why, for instance, Georgia has reciprocity with Kansas, but not with Nebraska. For the life of me, I don't know why, right? Two Midwestern states, similar demographics. I don't know if the training is just different. So some of it could just be, kind of luck of the draw. So their training must be different.
Just piss them off at some point.
Yeah, I mean that.
Quit buying peaches from Georgia.
Right.
What do you do if you're mistakenly transporting your firearm in a different state in what they would consider to be an illegal way, and the police stop you? What would you recommend?
Yeah, so this is kind of a tough question for me, and I wrestled with it preparing to shoot this, because the defense attorney in me says, if you're breaking the law, you have an absolute right to remain silent and not to incriminate yourself, right? But at the same time, what we're dealing with here, so we'll say it's carrying a concealed firearm, right? It's a misdemeanor in every state that I'm aware of, right? And depending on where you're at, so say I'm carrying in lower back and I reach forward to get my insurance and the officer sees that, this could escalate this in a very dramatic way very quickly to the point where I would rather I think it's probably safest to throw yourself at the mercy of that officer and say, look, I didn't realize if they say something, I didn't realize that it was illegal for me to carry in Minnesota, for instance. I just assumed that being a Midwestern state, they'd honor my Nebraska permit. At that point, as long as everything else checks out and you're not committing any other crimes, you may be able to avoid a ticket if the officer's feeling generous. And a lot of states are going to have some sort of first offender program, right? In Nebraska, if you have 2 misdemeanor convictions or less, you can automatically enroll in diversion and try to get a criminal charge dismissed and expunged from your record. A lot of states are going to have something similar to that you would probably qualify for.
Yeah, I've heard some stories where, the cop's nice enough not to ticket them or take away their gun, but they'll field strip the gun to the bare bones as much as they can and then hand it back to them.
Yeah, which as long as they don't get down to the trigger grouping, I'd be fine. But once I get to I don't think I'd trust myself on the fly to put a trigger bar back on and trust my life to that.
Springs everywhere, just bouncing around. I don't know where this goes.
Yeah.
I get it. No, and I totally agree with the answer with that. Is it's going to be safest for everybody to just let them know, because like you said, the last thing that you want to do is have that officer see that you have a gun and you didn't tell him they had a gun, and now he wants to know why you didn't tell him that you had a gun. And in those states as well, they're not really used to seeing a lot of guns, so it just puts panic into a situation. And I mean, totally agree with you, Seth. It's for safety purposes. I mean, that's exactly what I would recommend.
Yeah, and another thing you could do, say it's concealing a firearm, is obviously if you just put it on the dash, right, it's not concealed anymore, right? But anytime if you're adjusting yourself as an officer is approaching a vehicle, again, that can be something that leads to kind of tensions. What is this person doing? Are they grabbing a gun? So the easy solution to avoid a concealed carry violation also carries its own risks, right?
I think the climate that we're in now probably has something to do with how the officer might treat you.
Oh, as far as just what?
Like if I was driving to Chicago or through Illinois to get to a different state 6 months ago as opposed to now, and I got stopped, and I was heading towards the direction of like Chicago or something. I'm sure they would be a little less lenient now than they would have been in the past.
Oh, well, everything's crazy right now. Everyone's on edge. Yeah. So with that,
I think there's a couple. I think there's a couple different ways you can look at that too, because, I mean, you know, it just kind of. I think it really just kind of depends on what the situation is. If you're somebody that is headed towards Chicago and you know what's going on with that, and you know the officer knows that you're headed towards Chicago, you don't have any priors, you don't have arrest records and things of that nature, I think that there's probably a pretty good chance that they understand why you want to be protected going up there. However, on the flip side, somebody that you know, may not, you know, it's a slippery slope to assume anything based on where you're headed, or even based on the officer that you deal with. I would just make it uniform across the board to try to be as honest as possible and throw yourself on the mercy of the court.
Nationwide reciprocity is something that could be used to solve a lot of these problems that we've been talking about, as far as having a firearm, you know, a concealed carry firearm in a different state and not getting in trouble. Could you give us a kind of a general definition of what that is, what the current status of it is in our nation, and how likely do you think it is to go anywhere?
yeah. So nationwide reciprocity would be, it could look one of two ways, where either there is a federal program, right? So you have a federal license to carry that you obtain through whatever qualifications it is there. The second would be you get the license in your state. Now all states are forced to reciprocate. So it could look one of two ways, but in either way, or in either instance, basically getting your license allows you to carry everywhere in the United States, regardless of whether you're a citizen of that state, you're not a citizen of that state, as long as you're following the local laws, right? So that's what it would look like. As far as the current status, it, like you said, it hasn't gotten any traction, any serious traction. I would love to see it get signed into law. At this point, with as divided as Congress is, and just DC is just a cesspool of nothing good getting done. So I would not put this on something that I feel is a high likelihood of happening anytime soon, probably because it makes too much sense.
Thanks again for being on the show. That wraps up this episode. Before we sign off, maybe if you just want to remind everybody who you are, who you work for.
Yeah, my name's Seth Morris. I'm an attorney at Berry Law Firm. In Nebraska, we represent people on a wide range of criminal and civil matters. For countrywide, we represent, so we're one of the biggest veterans disability firms. So if you know a veteran that is fighting with the VA to get the disability benefits that they've earned, give us a call.
Awesome. Thanks again.
Thank you.